Number two is the age-old composition. You've all heard about, everybody talks about composition. Now, this being a camera club, I'm sure you guys have all heard like rules of thirds and the golden mean and all that stuff. and that's language we use to talk about composition. But composition is something bigger than that. Composition is the construction of the photograph within four sides. And that's really important. And sometimes those four sides are better square. Sometimes they're better long and skinny. Sometimes they're better exactly as 2 by 3. Part of composition is picking the canvas size you want to use. And the thing is, you may not shoot that way depending on what camera you're using. Your camera may be a 4 by 5 aspect ratio, or it may be a 2 by 3 aspect ratio. But when it comes time to look and say, what photograph do I want to make here? You might decide, really this would be more interesting as a square photograph. And I'm going to have to get rid of part of this photograph. That is not impure. That is not a sin. Because if you have a 35mm format camera that's a 2 by 3 ratio, it doesn't mean you can only use it to take a 2 by 3 photograph. That's a compositional choice that you have to make. Construction. Where are things? Where is foreground? Where is background? How much of the frame am I going to devote to background? What's going on in all four corners? Those are compositional choices that you have to make. And later, when you're judging a photograph, you have to analyze. The viewer doesn't just see the center of the photograph. The viewer sees every inch of the photograph. And so you have to control every inch of the photograph. This is again a place where I will put lens selection is part. Remember I said it's part of subject. It's also part of composition, because a lens that's very long is going to give you a narrow canvas with few details. A lens that's very wide is going to give you a lot of details, and how you decide to position those details is a compositional choice. So remember that. And the last thing I'm going to tell you about composition, and this is maybe to put you in my head for the sake of knowing what my taste is. I'm not a big fan of compositional rules. And there I could list you thousands of them. Things like, if you've ever worked for a newspaper, they never want a picture looking outside the edge of the paper. People should look into the paper, not out of the paper. Well, that's to get people to read the story, because photos in a newspaper are just tricks to get you to read the words. Well, it's true.
She shoots for the news.
I've done it too. Isn't that true? Less now than it was when I started 30 years ago.
Right.
Really, photos were window dressing, and you could come up with the greatest photograph in the world, and if the story sucked, nobody even noticed it. It's not so much true anymore. But when it comes to all the rules of composition, I don't really care. Just between me and you, except for one thing. Does it work emotionally for this photograph? Does it make me want to stay and look at the photograph? Does it have the balance or tension or whatever that you intend? If all of your photographs, I need a blackboard, are clearly with the center thing of interest in that little circle that's naturally in the center of your viewfinder, I'm going to guess that's not intentional. But if your photograph is absolutely symmetrical in every way, and you've chosen to put the sweet thing right smack in the middle of all that symmetry, I'm going to look at that and say, of course, that's not a mistake. That's an intention, and it works for this photograph. So there's no rules for composition. And this is really important. Composition, I think, is extremely emotional. And that's one of the photographs are an emotional thing. And when we see, that's what makes us photographers, is because we see something, we have an emotional reaction to it, and we want to share that. We want to say, here's what I saw, and when you see it, I want you to have a similar, you probably won't be the same, but a similar experience to what I had. And so you have to consider that composition when you make that choice. Do I want this to be a friendly, a happy feel? That would be composed one way. Is this sort of scary? You radically change your composition to make something appear frightening. And that may be the reaction you want with your photograph. And so composition is one of those tools that allows you to do that. And one of the three things that will be in my head when I consider a photograph. And whether or not I'll have it in my head consciously, I will tell you this. Everybody who looks at a photograph has that in their head. Just like everybody who looks at a photograph has subject in their head. I didn't make these things up. These are the way human beings interact with photography.